Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to a Books Beside My Bed video. If you're new here, I film one of these every week where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading, and if you're very familiar with the series, welcome back. This is my reading week from the 25th until the 30th of September. I read 12 things plus a couple of extra books, which I can't talk about in this video. That equated to 2,623 pages, and my yearly reading total is 383 books. So I've had a massive week. It was my last week of the holidays before I go back to work, which I will be going back to work the morning after this video goes live. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that, but you know, we're just going to go with it because I have to go back to work. As I said, I'm going to be talking about 12 books. I'm not going to talk about all of them in huge amounts of detail, obviously, otherwise this video will be forever long. There are 3 extra books that I'm not talking about in this video because they will be in a vlog sometime towards the second half of October. Yeah, at the moment, I've currently got reading vlogs going on in all different directions at the moment, and it's a bit bizarre for me, but we're just going to go with it. All right, so the first book that I read this week was His Leading Lady by Jenny Nordbak. I actually got an early copy of this from the Bonkers Romance website. I joined the Temple of Defiant Joy, which is sort of their Patreon/tier subscription thing. And as part of it, you get access to a couple of early release books for their book club. And this is Jenny Nordbak's first fiction release. And oh my God, it was amazing. It is going to be one of my favorite books of the year. I've already ordered myself a physical copy and I cannot wait to physically hold this book and possibly reread it because I loved it that much. So this is a contemporary romance. It's kind of hate to love initially, but it is basically about an A-list Hollywood actor called Alex Chase who has just landed this role as a very dark, dominant character in this movie. But this is a totally different role for him to play. And he's previously been seen as sort of the golden boy of Hollywood. And in order to prepare for this role and to help bring out his inner alpha male character, he ends up hiring Lady Elena, who is one of the premier dominatrixes in Los Angeles. And initially she's not on board with the idea. And eventually she comes around to it because she's a massive fan of the book series that the movie that he's going to be making is based off of, and she wants him to do it justice. And so they come to an arrangement where they have a fake relationship in order to sell this, because otherwise he's going to have to explain why he's sneaking off to go and visit a LA dungeon. The story goes from there. It is extremely hot and so well written, and Lady Elena is just one of my favorite characters, and someone, I can't remember who it was an author who basically said, all I can see in my head for the character of Alex Chase is Chris Evans, and now I can't unsee it, and now I can't unsee it, and it was just amazing. It is good fun. It is super steamy, and I really want the next books in this series because you can kind of see where she's set up for the next lot of characters, and it's going to be great. But what I will say about this book, just to be aware of it, is that there are mentions of sexual harassment and sexual assault, and it has to do with a former client of Lady Elena's who also works in the entertainment industry, and you can draw your allusions to real world things going on there. But I thought it was really well handled in the story. Then I read a book called, well, a short story / novella called 0 Hour by Tina Glasnick. This is Order of the Dragons 0.5. I honestly don't remember all that much about this book. I think I just picked it up because it was short, sitting on my TBR, and it meant that I would get through an extra book. I'm pretty sure that the basic premise is that Leslie, who is a young black woman, her father has passed away. They didn't have the greatest relationship, but she didn't get a chance to say goodbye, and so she tries to raise him as a vampire. However, it doesn't go to plan, and she gets her hands on this grimoire that will supposedly help her speak to her father, and in turn it sort of summons a whole stack of vampires to her and possibly an unspeakable evil type character thing. I don't know, this one was really hard for me to follow considering it was only like 50 pages long or something like that. I actually really struggled to focus on it. Not entirely convinced I'm going to continue with the series, which is a shame because I was kind of intrigued by the concept. Then I read Rowe by Jessica Gaziella. This is the 4th book in the Henchman MC Next Generation series. I did get this from the author for review, and this follows Rowe and Billy. So Billy is the daughter of one of the original Henchman MC members, so she's a club princess, and Rowe is a relatively new to the club compared to some of the others, but he has still been there for a while. And in previous books, we've learned that Billy has a massive crush on Rowe, but he's actually turned her down in quite a humiliating way. Not in front of other people, but to her face. So at the start of this book, they are not in a good place. However, Rowe is injured while out on a job with the other members of the club, and he's not healing properly, and he's really become quite depressed with his injury because it was an injury to his back. His friends decide to take him to Billy, who is an absolute ray of sunshine. She's an incredibly sex positive character in the series. A lot of the funny conversations between all the female characters in the series usually stem from conversations with Billy. And she runs all sorts of things. She's very much into natural healing and she is a masseuse and all of that. And so unbeknownst to Rowe, he ends up being taken to Billy's apartment because she has agreed to see if some of her natural remedies or things like that might help him. And of course, this forces them to spend more time together, and it is a true Grumpy Sunshine story. And then there is the subplot where Rowe discovers that Billy has a stalker and she ends up being kidnapped and needs to be rescued. This one was a lot of fun. Also, bonus points for the Finn cameo. So Finn is the character from The Cleaner in the Professional series, and I love him. He's an absolute precious bean, and his cameo in this book was just gorgeous. The next book I read was The Game Plan by Kristen Callahan. This is the third book in her Game On series, and of course I have not read the first two books in that series because it's me. It is the story of Dex, who is a professional NRL player. His real name is Ethan, but everyone calls him Dex, and he ends up falling for his best friend's sister-in-law. He's been interested in her for a couple of years, never made a move, and then they are in town at the same time and they're out at the same bar, and seemingly innocent Bet ends up with them starting to pursue a relationship. This is an interesting one because the hero is a virgin, and that ends up being reported in the media, which causes a whole lot of stir, and then also some conflict in their relationship. Not because he's a virgin, but because it's been released to the public. This one I really liked, but I feel like the third act dragged out just a little bit. Then I read Twitch and Charge by Kate C. Wells, which is the prequel novella and the first book in her Steel Bones Motorcycle Club series. I just picked these up on a whim. So Twitch is the novella, and this one follows Shirlene and Twitch, and it's set in 1971, I think. And Shirlene was an army nurse in Vietnam, and she's returned home. She's working in a hospital, and she's having to deal with absolute blatant misogyny from male doctors who think that a nurse's job is to only do what they're told. And she obviously spent time in a war zone where she was someone who had to make life or death decisions for some of her patients at times, and she's finding this environment really stifling, and she's also struggling with readjusting to life back stateside. And then one night in the hospital, Twitch is brought in because he's come off his bike, and he recognizes her and is very interested in getting to know her because he's so different to the life that her parents want her to have and the life that she's expected to have. She ends up spending more time with him. It's really short. I actually really enjoyed this one for how short it was, and it encouraged me to pick up the first book in the series, which was Charge. So Charge is an age gap single parent romance story. It is about Kayla, who has a 6-year-old son. She has some trauma in her background, and we know that she's terrified that her parents are going to take her son away from her, and she has just moved out on her own with her son. There are conditions on her moving out, like having a job and also being there for her son Jimmy whenever he needs her. And as she's unpacking, her son's out in the backyard, and this guy who looks like he belongs to a motorcycle gang just starts helping carry her things in so that he can flirt with her. And then he obviously freaks out when he realizes that she has a son. There is about a 10 or 12 year age gap between Kayla and Charge, and he's actually the son of one of her new neighbors. And despite the fact that he is not at all interested in being in a relationship and having to deal with a kid, Charge finds that he can't stop himself from spending time with Kayla. He realizes that she's struggling for money and that something is not quite right. This one does have content warnings in it for rape, which occurs off the page, and also really, really toxic parents. The way that they treated Kayla in this book was absolutely abhorrent. And the sad thing is, it's something that I know that many people go through, because she had her son when she was 15. And they decided that she was not capable of caring for him, so they sent her away and took the baby, and it's just not cool. I did really like the story. I like the side characters that are set up as well, and the showdown at the end was just fantastic. Then I read Ensnared by Tiffany Roberts, which is the Spider's Mate book 1. I ummed and ahed about picking this book up so many times, and then I listened to the Bonkers Romance podcast and I decided, okay, that's fine. I'm gonna read it and just see where I fall on it. I have to admit, not convinced I'm gonna continue the series, but it was an interesting sort of story and not as weird as I thought it was going to be. So this is the spider romance that everyone was talking about a little while ago. So we have Catan, who is the spider male person thing. I don't know how we can describe him. I've forgotten the name of his race. Anyway, he is a former weaver turned warrior who has turned his back on living in the city and is very resentful of the current queen of his people, and so he lives permanently out sort of in the jungle on the outskirts of the city. And he works as a hunter and he brings his tributes to the city only when he's required to, because the queen has made it very, very clear that she wants him as her mate, and he wants absolutely nothing to do with her because he cannot stand her. And that's fair enough, because she is very terrible. One day while he's out hunting, he accidentally stumbles across a crashed spacecraft, and inside it he opens up one of the life support cryogenic pods and ends up with this human woman called Ivy at his feet. And he decides, excellent, she can be my pet. And so he carries her off, takes her back to his place, and decides to keep her as a pet. And then, of course, they have to learn how to communicate with one another. They have to learn their boundaries. And of course, being a monster romance, there's a lot of exploring of the differences between different people's bodies. Content warning in this one for spiders. There is bondage in this one, which is kind of cool in concept for the way that it comes about. And there are a lot of really funny scenes. I don't know, this one just didn't hit the mark for me. Then I read Magic Bleeds by Lona Andrews. This is Kate Daniels' book 4. This is where we finally get the relationship between Kate and Curran. So I'm not going to talk too much about this because I'm going to be talking about it significantly on the live show in the middle of the month. So I'll leave the date for that down below. Pretty much the majority of this book is Kate and Curran being really annoyed at each other for standing each other up and not communicating effectively. And then along the way, you have Kate investigating a magical plague carrier who is running rampant in the city, causing all sorts of chaos. It was pretty fun. This one introduces some of my favorite characters who we now see in every book subsequent. It was good, but I was talking to Heather about this one, and this book reminded me of exactly how much growth these characters have, because the way that Curran and Kate interact with each other, man, they get so much better at it in later books. It's pretty rough for this book. And then I read 7 Day Loan by Tiffany Rice, which is the first prequel novella in the Original Sinners series, which I do want to read, but I'm sort of working my way up to it. So in this one, we have Daniel and Eleanor, and Daniel is a widow and his wife died 3 years earlier, and since then he's sort of become a shut-in. He's not been able to cope with the world, and then his friend decides to loan him his submissive because Daniel was part of that world as well, and it's a 7-day loan, hence the title. I think in the US it's possibly called The Gift. Anyway, Eleanor is loaned to him in order to try and wake him up from his life, and over the 7 days all sorts of things happen. It's an erotic novella, and Daniel falls head over heels for Eleanor. However, there is a time limit on this relationship and she is not his. And we discover later on that the whole thing is a test, but it's not a test for him, it's a test for her. And she is a character who pops up throughout all of the books because she's the main character of the series, I think. Anyway, so I read that because I also have ordered, and some of them have arrived already, the Original Sinners pulp mass market paperbacks that Tiffany Rice is releasing, just because I love the covers of these. They look like oil paintings and they're gorgeous. So the next book that I read was The Auction, which is another novella from the Original Sinners world. And this one is what happens to Daniel after 7 Day Loan. So at the end of 7 Day Loan, Daniel has reclaimed his life and he's gone off traveling. And in this book, he's come back to New York and he's reconnecting with some of his friends from the BDSM scene, and he's not sure whether or not he wants to see Eleanor again. As he goes back to visit one of his old friends, he meets Anya, who is an incredibly feisty young woman who he finds out is the grand prize at an auction that his friend is throwing because she is a virgin and she is auctioning off her virginity in order to raise money to provide for her family. And he tries to convince her not to do it. It is their relationship. It is very much a hate to love. It is super, super steamy. This one more is erotic romance because there is at least an HFN at the end of this book, and it was just really great to see how Daniel had changed from the first novella to the second one. But obviously content warning for a virginity auction and BDSM as well. Then I read Magic Dreams by Lona Andrews. This is the 4.5 novella in the Kate Daniels series. This one follows Darlie and Jim. So Jim is sort of the head of security for the pack, and Darlie is a white tiger shifter who we had met in book 3. And her family comes from a line of people who use magic. So even though she's a shifter, she is also trained in using magic, which is not always the case with shifters. Dali comes home to find that Jim is at her place and he is not well. And she eventually gets out of him that he went to one of his safe houses and he saw this writing on the floor. The people from the safe house were missing, and he lost consciousness while he was there. They quickly find out that something is draining his essence and they don't know what it is. And so Dali sets out to try and figure out what has happened. On reread, I enjoyed this a lot more. I think having spent a lot more time with these characters and really appreciating them for who they are, I really enjoyed this one a lot more. So this will also be part of the conversation for the next live show. Finally, the last book that I read was For a Good Time Call by Jessica Gadziala. This is Scars book 1. And this is actually the story of one of the Malik brothers that is not part of the Malik Brothers series, which is why I went back and reread this one, because this takes place before all of that. So this is the story of Fiona and Hunter. And Fiona is a phone sex operator who is living in an apartment in New York City. She meets her new neighbor, Hunter, who has just moved in. They have some really pointed observations of one another because they don't know each other yet. However, we know that Fiona is self-harming, so she's cutting, and she's also abusing alcohol after hours because she can't be by herself in her apartment at night time. So she goes out for hours and hours and then stumbles home blind drunk. And Hunter tries to figure out what is going on with her because there is one night where she is assaulted and he saves her, and then he begins to figure out all these connecting things. And as it turns out, Fee had a very abusive childhood, including a religious zealot for a father. And as a result of that, she was really horribly mutilated by her father. So that is a massive content warning. Yeah, this one I would proceed with caution if you have any triggers like that, because she's not in a good place. All right, so those are the books that I have read in the last 7 days. In the comments, feel free to let me know if you have read any of these or if you're planning on picking any of them up. Alternatively, feel free to share something that you have read in the last week. I would love to hear about it. If you want to let me know you're here but you don't want to leave a comment, leave a spider emoji in the comments. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I'll see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye everyone.